Welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. Our continuing series, World History from 1450 till almost yesterday. The world is a terrible thing to waste. The Ottoman Turks, victory, and what could have been. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks accomplished what the Goths, the Persians, the Arabs, the Seljuk Turks, and even the Mongols couldn't do in 1,000 years of trying. And that was to turn the largest Christian church in the world, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, in Constantinople, into the largest mosque in the world, in Istanbul. So what they accomplished in 1453 was to capture Constantinople, the queen of cities. The most important political objective in Islam. It's in the Quran. When the Quran refers to Rome, it is not referring to Italy. It is referring to Constantinople, because the Byzantines referred to Constantinople as the new Rome. This makes the Ottoman Turks the leading people of Islam. And we have to now ask, how? How did they accomplish a thing that all these other people, including other Turks, including the Mongols, couldn't accomplish? We have to ask, how? Well, the massive walls and technological superiority kept out enemies. Invaders came, bounced off, and eventually had to go off and conquer someone else, or were conquered by somebody else. The Mongols broke up the Seljuk Empire before the Seljuks could get to Constantinople. The Ottoman absorbed those shards. And what they did was invest in diversity. They were willing to hire anyone: Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, Kurds. And that list is important because when we get to part 3 of our class, or even part 2 of our class, and we talk about what happens in the 20th century, the Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, and Kurds are going to have a history. And it's not going to be a happy one. So, but right now in 1450, the Turks are willing to hire anyone with talent, capable of being loyal and working with the Turks. They have to break through those massive walls that no one else can get through. And that brings us to innovation. The Turks are willing to invest in cannon and muskets. And you may go, well, that's obvious. Sure. But the Turks aren't good at infantry. The Turks aren't an advanced intellectual technological people in 1450. They're nomadic horse peoples running around the Anatolian plateau, conquering their way into southeastern Europe. They are willing to do new things, but that's not where their talent in 1450 lies. It means they have to change, and that's the important thing. It's not that they're behind and willing to stay behind. They're willing to change. Diversity. They bring in people with new ideas, and they're willing to absorb those new ideas and innovate upon them. That's not easy for people to do. That's liberal. That's not conservative. Conservatism says things are working the way we have them. Why change? And what the Turks are doing is saying our future goal to capture Constantinople requires us to change. If we stay the same, we will never get there. We will never accomplish our goal. So the Ottoman army becomes, for all intents and purposes, the first gunpowder army. It is highly trained and technologically advanced. If you're looking at the video, you could see one of the Constantinople guns, these gigantic gunpowder cannon that are useless at shooting anything at people. But at walls, at cities, at things that don't move, at castles, they're excellent. They just keep hitting things with something the size of a Volkswagen until it falls apart. But to make that cannon, to use those muskets, you have to invest in education to learn the technology. How are you going to build it? How does it work? How do we make gunpowder? Because you can't import it from anybody. Nobody else has it. Sure, it's in the textbooks. It's in the chemistry textbooks. It was invented in China 200 years earlier or more, and they use it for fireworks. The Mongols used it to shoot at people, and so did the Koreans. But for the most part, those were like arrows with like bottle rocket arrows and things of that nature. This is different. And besides, you can't just pick up a whole bunch of Chinese people or Koreans or Mongols and just ship them to the middle of the Anatolian Plateau and say, okay, now make me cannon. You have to learn how to do it. Then you have to learn the industry, how to make it work, how to literally make cannon and muskets. Because if you can't make it, then you will never have enough to use. You'll always be importing it from somebody else, and they could always stop selling. You become dependent. You can't conquer the world if you're dependent. The third is to turn peasants into gunners. And that's huge. You're going to arm your peasants? That's a lot of trust. You don't know if they're going to shoot you. So a lot of armies, especially in the Middle Ages, do not trust their peasants with weapons. The Turks do. And not only do the Turks do, the Turks are willing to give those guns to non-Turks. That's how much trust they have. So again, diversity in the form of the Janissaries. The Janissaries are Christian, mostly Slavic, infantry from southeastern Europe that are employed mostly to fight other Christians, other Christian infantry. And the reason why is the Turks are cavalry. So they're on their horses. Well, if you're on your horses, you shoot your bows. Okay, but what does infantry do? They put up their shields, they get into a box, they get into a square, and they wait for you to run out of arrows, and then they march forward. Like, cavalry on its own usually can't beat infantry, but infantry on its own also can't usually defeat cavalry because it's too slow, right? The cavalry can just run away. So what happens is the infantry walks up onto something, a castle, a town, that once they take it, they don't have to move. They're there. Boom. And mostly what happens is the horse archers run out. You can only carry so many arrows on your back. Your horse can only carry so many. And if you're horse people, you don't really have the industry to make 30 million arrows, right? You don't have huge towns with large factories. Like, the whole point of you being nomadic horse people is that you make the stuff yourself, you're self-sufficient, and you are constantly on the move. So the two just kind of cancel each other. Infantry versus cavalry kind of cancel each other out. But infantry versus infantry with cavalry, well, now that can be devastating. But the Turks aren't going to get off their horses. That would be dumb. So use Christians who already know how to fight. going as far back as the Greeks and the Romans. They already know how to fight in infantry. They already know how to fight with their feet on the ground. So let them kill each other. Great. And so the Janissaries are part of this diversity. And the Janissaries become the best part of the Turkish army, which is, believe me, does not go unnoticed in Turkish government, in Turkish philosophy, that there's a problem that the best soldiers might just be non-Turks, that's a problem. And in fact, it becomes a problem. So the Janissaries started as slaves. That was the idea, to guarantee that they are loyal to the Sultan. And they become the best troops, the most innovative troops, the one the Sultan needs to keep expanding his empire. That gives him victory. That gives the Janissaries privileges and wealth and plunder. So they kind of stop being slaves. Because if you have your best troops doing your best stuff, and they're the thing you need, you're relying on the most, and they're accomplishing your goals, you give them stuff. In 1517, they defeated Egypt, and the Turkish Sultan becomes Caliph, the official leader of Islam. Isn't that awesome? And believe me, that's a big deal, because Muhammad, the prophet, was an Arab. The Rashidun were Arabs. The caliphs are supposed to be Arabs. The Arabs are the chosen people. If Allah wanted a Turk to be caliph, Allah would have chosen a Turk to be a prophet. He didn't. And so the idea that the Turks grab it, take it, become caliph is a humiliation to Arabs. It's a sign of just how weak, how defeated, how poor the Arabs are, how disunited. They had gone from nearly conquering Constantinople and all of Europe themselves, spreading Islam into Africa and down the coast, into India. And now they're being run by the Turks, a nomadic horse people from Central Asia? Come on. And in 1526, Suleiman the Magnificent, who we'll talk about soon, conquers Hungary, the largest Catholic state in Eastern Europe. And by 1529, the Turkish armies are actually at the gates of Vienna. They have conquered Eastern Europe all the way from southern Poland, from the borders of southern Poland, all the way to central Germany. They look like they're going to conquer the world. They've conquered the southwestern Asia. They've conquered Egypt. They have the North African kings, sultans, or whatever their titles was in their back pocket as allies. They control the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf and the Arab Sea trade to India. They control the Silk Road, or the end of the Silk Road, the most valuable part, where it becomes retail, where wholesale becomes retail. So was Suleiman the Magnificent really magnificent? Yes. Heck yeah, he was. He combined military power. He had his janissaries. He had cannon. He had a gunpowder navy. He has victories everywhere. Everywhere. he had unmatched soft power. So people, when they thought of him, when they said Suleiman the Magnificent, they called him the Magnificent. They thought of him as magnificent. That's soft power. Soft power is not military power. It's not the ability to punch somebody in the face. It's the ability to get people to like you when they don't even know you. That's soft power. People believed the Turks were powerful. What they heard about the Turks made them powerful. People had an impression Suleiman really was magnificent. And we see this in the weird, not weird, but in the interesting transformation of Constantinople from a dreary, kind of sad, run-down, Greek, Orthodox, Christian place into Istanbul, the sublime port. Even in my Swedish documents in the 1600s, in the 1650s, the port comes up, the great port, the sublime port comes up more than Constantinople comes up as a word, as a way of describing them. And that great port is seen as like the most innovative place in capitalism. It's exotic. It's got this sexual liberty. Like there's the stories of the harem and the sex clubs. It's kind of in a way Amsterdam is maybe for you, or Vegas is. It's got this Eastern luxury. They have stuff, the silks and the spices and the opium and all of this stuff that you not only have never seen, not only don't have access to, you have never seen it before. They have exotic belly dancers. No one does that in Europe. They've got drugs, so much drugs, that make you feel so much better. And remember, most people's lives in Europe hurt. I don't want to say they suck, but they hurt. Farming hurts. Getting old hurts. And you're old by your 40s because every day you're dealing with animals and farming and back-breaking labor of using your muscles. So it hurts. And here are these drugs. Whoo! That could take the pain away. That could make you do interesting things. That could make you see interesting things. Like the hashish. The hashish trade was huge because Islam doesn't allow you to drink. So there's the hashish. In Central Asia, there's literally the hashish vodka line. There's a line, and it's a geographic temperate line. It's about temperature. And below that line, above that line, everyone became Christian because it was cold and you could grow essentially potatoes and you could make vodka. Below that line was where opium grew. So south of that line, not below, but south of that line is where opium grew. And everyone south of that line basically became Muslim. Till they hit the mountains, till they hit the Himalayas. And then people south of the Himalayas are in a different zone. So we're talking about Central Asia. But this idea, this soft power gives birth to Orientalism. This idea of what the East is like. And that will continue through Kipling. We're going to talk about Kipling. And this idea of the East as a place that white men can go and leave their worries behind, leave their problems behind, leave the rules and the standards behind. Whereas in America, go West, young man, freed you. It gave you an ability to do violence, and you were on your own. Kill or be killed, right? And it was an independence. That's not true in Europe. That's not true for the Brits. That's not true for the Dutch. That's not true for the French. What the East represented, and Africa as well, was what Joseph Conrad will eventually call the heart of darkness. That's what happens when it curdles. But this idea that you could be a great man in great civilizations, that it wasn't empty. The idea of the West was that it was empty and it had to be conquered. And there were dangers there. There were Native Americans, there were animals, there were huge geographic deserts, but you could conquer it. The East had India, Pakistan, Thailand, Indonesia, Korea, China, Japan. It had great civilizations full of amazing things Europe doesn't have. And that's the Orientalism, this idea of the East as not European and not as rule-bound and not as civilized as Europe. There's also the cultural power. He built Constantinople into Istanbul, built a Topkapi Palace 150 years before Versailles. He invested in poetry, mosaics, dance, architecture, philosophical debate. Diplomats who go to his palace are blown away by the simple culture coming out of Istanbul. Topkapi Palace. There we go. Topkapi. So why don't the Turks conquer the world? Well, there's two reasons. The first is Europe catches up. And they catch up very quickly because they're able to conquer the Americas. The Turks have no access. They don't have the ships. They don't have the geography. They're not on the Atlantic. They'd have to sail vessels all the way through the Mediterranean to get to the Atlantic. And those are two different kinds of oceans. Yes, the Mediterranean is a sea. But you need galleys. You need to row on the Mediterranean. The winds are not predictable, and they blow west to east. They blow against the Turks. And then you get to the Atlantic. Whew! You need big ships with lots of sails. So, in a way, geography, which had blessed them in the age of the Silk Road, hurts them in the age of exploration and the conquering of America. So that by 1571, now remember, 1571 is less than 100 years from Columbus discovering America and Da Gama reaching India. Right? So in less than 100 years, Europe catches up. In fact, had the Byzantines held out for another 50 years, their 1,000-year civilization, it had lasted 50 more years, we might still have a Byzantine Greek state today in Eastern Europe. So I'm kind of with Edward Gibbon on this one about how the fall of Constantinople really is a change. It really is a dividing line. Because it is really at the end of one age and the beginning of another. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571, Europe has navies, guns, and power. It's Venice and the Pope. Venice has gunpowder ships with cannon on them. A city can take on the Turks. Has caught up in wealth. So Europe is catching up because they have plundered the Americas. the Incas in the 1530s, the Aztecs in the 1520s, the Caribs in the 1500s. Like, the amount of wealth that just comes pouring in. And remember, the king gets 15%. We're going to talk about this later, but the king gets 15%. And he poured it, the king of Spain pours it right into military power. The second thing is that the Silk Road begins to be closed down by the Ming, which means less trade and less money. And the Europeans go around the Turks by ship. If you're watching the video, you will see that the Dutch trade by ships. The Dutch are going to become the merchants of the 1700s. And they go by ship. So they never touch any of the Ottoman territories. They go to North America, they go to South America, they go around Africa to India, they go to Indonesia, they go to China and Japan. There's no need for the Ottomans. There's no need for the Turks. So not only are the Europeans catching up, but the markets are closing down. The Ming are shutting down the Silk Road, and the Europeans are going around the Turks anyway. So there's less money. And then you get bad rulers. After Suleiman the Magnificent, it's just a disaster. In one stretch, there is 13 completely incompetent sultans. They're bad rulers. There's less money, but they keep spending the same amount on themselves, which means the palace, the harem, take up more and more of a percentage of income. They are turning very, very conservative, which there's nothing wrong with, except Europe is changing. Europe is coming for them. Europe is in a revolution. Every state in Europe is catching up or passing the Turks. So there's less money to spend on. So what do you spend it on? Reforms or pleasure? And what these bad rulers do is pleasure. So that, remember that exotic, that sexual liberty under Suleiman the Magnificent? That's seen as a positive. That's seen as a wonder. Now it becomes decadence. Now it's seen as, oh, these guys can't. It's the drunks. There are people who enjoy a good drink. And then there's the people who can't sober up. One is the fun guy you go out with. The second is the guy who you throw out of your business and tell him never to come back. So what happens is that exoticism gets curdled, gets turned into the Turks and their opium, the Turks and their drugs, the Turks and their sleaze, the Turks and their decadence. They can't get out of their own way. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which might be fine in your 20s. It's a little much in your 70s, right? Even if you get good rulers, they threaten the status quo. And so there was institutions that immediately moved to replace them, to get rid of them, because they were threatened. Because there's still groups that are either close to the Sultan, or they're the Janissaries who don't want to lose their privileges, right? If the army is falling behind, you got to reform the army. The problem is the army is doing fine. They have a lot of privilege. They don't want to be reformed, because any reforms that are going to happen are going to mean they're going to lose their privileges. So like, here, I'll give you a privilege. The Janissaries are so great, they can stay in Istanbul. They don't have to leave. They certainly don't have to go to Arabia 1,000 miles away in the middle of a desert to take care of rebels. Okay, now we have a revolt in Arabia. A good ruler would want to put down that revolt, fix the problem, turns to his Janissaries and says, Janissaries, I am paying the most amount of money for you. You are my best troops. You go and settle this. And the Janissaries look at him and go, we ain't going. We're staying right here. I got a wife. I've got kids. I've got a business. I got things going on. Yeah, me and the boys, we all have guns. So what about you just go into your sex palace and you leave us alone? Send somebody else. And that's literally what happens. They will install sultans. They will just shoot them and then turn to the brother and say, you want to be a sultan or not? And reload their guns. And the guy goes, the brother goes, yeah, I'll be a sultan. And he goes, so where are you going to spend your sultanhood? And he says, in my sex palace? Great. Very good. Do you see the problem? The problem is that the Swedes are creating perhaps the strongest firepower army in the world in 1615, 1620, 1630. And that's the Swedes. Imagine what France is doing, what Spain has already done. So, what is the Ottoman Empire by 1815? It is rural, poor, undereducated, religiously conservative. It is against change. It is badly led and incapable of reform. So even if it had got good leaders, it couldn't do anything. Those good leaders weren't allowed to change anything. So Europeans begin taking over its empire. Napoleon shows up in Egypt and just says, it's mine now, thank you. And then later the Brits show up and kick him out and say, okay, Egypt's mine now. Like, they don't give it back to the Turks. They say, Egypt's mine. Thank you. And then they start fighting. In the 1850s, they start fighting over with each other. There's the Crimean War. Britain and France, who are enemies, joined up as friends to fight Russia because the Russian Empire looked like it might take over the Ottomans, might take over and unify the Black Sea. And that would hurt the British and French desires to control the Middle East. The Turks don't even matter anymore by 1850. The minorities begin getting independence, the Greeks and the Armenians, the Kurds and the Arabs. And that whole idea of nationalism, that the Greeks, Armenians, Kurds, and Arabs are not Turkish, and so they should get their own country, could implode the Ottoman Empire. Like, this is what's going to happen in 1917, 1918 to Austria. Austria has like 20 different peoples in it. The Austrian Empire. That's a problem if each of those 20 people want to be independent. Because there is an empire, there's nothing that holds an empire together except the idea that it's an empire. So this could implode the Turkish state. So nationalism is a problem. And yet nationalism is how countries are beginning to organize themselves. There's a Sweden for the Swedes, right? A Denmark for the Danes. Not yet a Germany for the Germans, but there's people who are arguing for one. There's an idea that the French should be in France. The English in England. And yet by 1850, we're talking about the United Kingdom, which is its own thing. And so nationalists, of which there's Turkish nationalists too, that are saying, okay, maybe the empire is useless, but Turkey, a Turkish state, a Turkey for the Turks, that could work. The problem is there is no Turkey. Even though there are people who refer to the Anatolia as Turkey, there's still a lot of Kurds and Greeks and Armenians in that territory. But what if we got rid of those minorities? What if we made Turkey Turkish, which in 8,000 years, since the time of the Hittites, it has never been. Anatolia is the crossroads of the world. It is a mixture of people. Take a look at the Odyssey and the Iliad, the amount of different peoples who lay claim. And take a look at my 101 class. We have Lydians, right? We have Phrygians. We have it was the land of 1,000 cities to the Romans. The idea that it would be one people is an insane concept. But what if? What if we kicked the Greeks out? What if we just shoot the Armenians? What if we starve the Kurds? What if? What if we push the Arabs with bulldozers across the mountains? What if? The problem is, to do that, to save the Turkish state, right? To make a Turkish country just for the Turks could save Turkey from being colonized, imperialized, conquered by the Europeans. The problem is, to accomplish it, you'd have to do something that hasn't been seen since the time of the Mongols. The mass extermination of minority groups. Well, we're going to see how part 2 of this class plays out. All right. Thank you very much. That's where we're ending. We're ending on the precipice of an Ottoman Empire falling apart, of the way to save it is to embrace modernity, but also embracing modernity might mean the mass murder of a whole lot of people. Be safe. Take care. Thank you.